Look, Minister, due to government failure to ensure that proper amenities and services are put in place for communities right across the state, many communities are under huge pressures because of those distinct failures. So can I ask what community audits are carried out by you, your department, or indeed other departments with regard to services, amenities in those communities before the placement of refugees or asylum seekers in those areas?
My department is now providing accommodation for over 100,000 people between those fleeing Ukraine and international protection applicants. And I've said before, this is the largest humanitarian response the state has ever undertaken, and my department is presently utilising a wide range of accommodation options to provide shelter for a record number of international protection applicants. Over 200 accommodation centres locations utilised since January of 2022 in over 26 across 26 counties. The accommodation of international protection applicants, as we know, is a demand-led process, and applicants are arriving in the country and they have to be accommodated. The provision of accommodation, of health, of education, of income and other supports as appropriate is given to both those arriving from Ukraine and international protection applicants, and that's a key focus, and it's an all-government approach to that. And that whole of government approach, it involves various departments, various agencies. As you know, within my own department, we've created a community engagement team to engage directly with Oudtis members, with county councillors, with communities in terms of providing information about new accommodation being opened, but also to answer queries as well. In relation to procuring accommodation for beneficiaries of temporary protection, so Ukrainians, my department meets very frequently with the Department of Tourism and with Fáilte Ireland in terms of understanding where the pressures are in terms of accommodation, and to ensure we can be as effective as possible in terms of where we're procuring additional accommodation. As you know, the government is very much focused on how we continue to provide sustained support for those fleeing here from the war in Ukraine. We have made significant changes to our offerings, and we're in the process of doing that at the moment. We're moving to state-provided accommodation being for a 90-day period, and during that period the financial supports, the income supports, will be less than they currently are. And in terms again of the international protection side, I'll be bringing a revised accommodation strategy forward, and this will primarily allow for better standards of accommodation, better value for money, but importantly better planning as in terms of where we locate new international protection accommodation.
Thanks for that, Minister, but unfortunately you failed to answer the question, a very specific question. What you did say is your department meets regularly with Fáilte Ireland. That doesn't address the serious issues facing communities right across the state. In my own constituency of Wicklow and Carnew, for example, where there's over 100 Ukrainians now placed, there's a part-time GP service there, 2 to 3 weeks waiting time for people. That has now, the waiting list grown longer. There's a crisis in school places, a shortage of teachers, shortage of classrooms, and that's replicated in Donegal, similar issues, in Roscommon, similar issues. So the question is, what audits have been carried out to assess where the deficiencies are, but more importantly, when those deficiencies are identified before the placement of international protection or indeed Ukrainian people in those communities, what actions are being taken to rectify or to put in place the proper services needed, not just for the increased demand in the communities, but to ensure that everybody, the local people in those areas that were under huge pressure before additional people arriving in their communities, they can be assessed and addressed also.
So as I said, when new accommodation is opened for either Ukrainians or for international protection applicants, the community engagement team through my department engages with local reps, but also with statutory services as well. So for example, on the issue of education, which you mentioned, Deputy, when the war in Ukraine broke out, the Department of Education created rail teams through all of the education training boards, and these rail teams allow for the identification of where there are places in primary and secondary schools, and indeed where there are pressure, and it allows for a better coordination for both initially for Ukrainians, but subsequently also for international protection applicants. And it has been really effective in terms of both ensuring that underutilised school places are utilised by either Ukrainians or international protection applicants, but further, where there are pressure on schools to engage with the Department of Education in terms about bringing forward new accommodation solutions in those schools. And I know Minister Foley has received significant increased capital funding to make that happen.
Can I say the approach has failed and failed utterly? The approach taken by the department, by government, seems to be one that is led by speculators making millions out of the process, and it isn't taken into consideration the needs of communities where additional pressures have been put on them. And indeed, many ministers have stood up in this chamber and given false promises, going right back to when Syrian refugees first arrived in Roscommon many years ago, where additional services were promised, and still to this day, many years later, those services have not been delivered in communities in Ballahidreen and in Roscommon, where there's huge pressures in terms of GPs and in terms of school places. False promises have been given, and that's led to huge levels of resentment, Minister. People want to do the right thing and support people coming to this stage seeking protection, but when the state fails, by putting more pressure on limited services within those communities, Minister, it causes resentment. And that failure is at your door, Minister, and the government's door.
I and my colleagues across government are acutely conscious of the pressures that have been caused by our response to a war. But I would also put it to you that it is at times of pressure, it is times of war, it is times of conflict where countries have to dig deep. And Irish people across our society have done that, and communities have rallied to support both Ukrainians and international protection applicants. And you know, I'm very conscious, having meeting Ukrainians, meeting international protection applicants, and meeting the communities that support them, how aware they are of the importance of this role and how unique the challenge we're facing is right now. The biggest movement of people across the European continent since the Second World War. Yes, it's caused challenges. Yes, it's caused pressures, but we will manage those challenges. We will make changes to the system to accommodate and to address the changed context. But I still, when I meet communities around the country, they continue to feel that we're doing the right thing and that we need to step up and support people who are vulnerable.